All right, it is 6:02. Let's just go ahead and get this started so we respect your time. Let me thank you for taking the time this evening to join our webinar about college planning. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Doug Dinyosos, financial advisor at EBW. This topic is quite timely. Yesterday, May 1, was College Decision Day, the day high school seniors have to choose where to enroll in the fall. However, some students are stuck in limbo waiting for delayed financial aid award letters. All I can say is what a nerve-wracking feeling that is. I can only imagine the chaos that is going through a student's head. With that in mind, let me introduce Laura Northart, the co-owner and college consultant for Loudoun College Counseling. Laura, would you like to say hello and make a comment about what your students have experienced firsthand with financial aid this year?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you guys for joining us. So I'm Laura Northart, as Doug mentioned. I co-own and consult at Loudoun College Counseling, and it has been a very stressful year for students for sure. With Decision Day, it was yesterday, May 1st, but a lot of colleges have actually pushed that back this year till May 15th, some even till June 1st. So some students still have not made up their mind, and it's been a very nerve-wracking process to say the least this year for our seniors who are very much in limbo about figuring out what their financial aid packages are. So, I get to see it firsthand, the stress that this, financial planning causes, especially this year. So it's an important topic.
For sure. So we want to respect your time. So let me paint a picture of what our agenda looks like. For the first half, I'll be talking about college costs and savings. Laura will then take over and discuss the admission process. Please save your questions for the end, and we will try to address them as time allows. Once again, I'm Doug Dinyosos, a financial advisor with EBW. I have been part of the team for about 13 years. Rather than telling you my bio, let me tell you all a story of why college planning is dear to my heart. I have two young children, Lena and Leo. Before my daughter was born, being the planning nerd that I am, by the way, my wife would be shaking her head at me if she heard me say that. I built a college funding scenario to show her what we would need to save to plan for using my alma mater, American University. Total cost today, tuition, books, room and board, is about $76,000 per year. Using a 5% rate of inflation, 18 years from now, that tuition is about $183,000. You heard that correctly. We went from 76,000 today to 183,000. That is a big difference, but more on that later on. Let's look at the bigger picture. Nearly $750,000 is needed for an undergraduate degree at AU. How do you think my wife reacted to these numbers? That's right, she was shocked. Like many of you, college is at the top of mind in the Dinyosos household. Some of you are parents, like myself and Laura. Others are grandparents, aunts, or uncles. Our goal is simple. It is our hope to teach you one thing to help with the complexities of college planning. And this is how we're going to address this topic. Number one, we're going to talk about why college matters. Number two, we're going to talk about what the true cost of college is, followed by financial aid, and then savings. First, let's talk about why higher education pays. College degree pays for itself. The average bachelor's degree holder earns 88% more than high school graduates. That's an extra $37,500 in 1 year alone. That's enough to pay for 3 semesters of current expenses at an in-state public college. Doctors, lawyers, and others with professional degrees typically earn almost twice as much as bachelor's degree recipients, and nearly 4 times more than high school graduates. The financial benefits of graduating from college are much higher than the cost of attending. Oops, skip too much. Let's talk about college tuition. So college tuition costs have increased more quickly than any other household expense since 1983, rising an average of about 5.8% each year. At that pace, tuition would double nearly every 12 years. That's right, every 12 years. That's nearly twice as fast as medical costs and about 4 times faster than home and gas prices. The typical family needs investments with long-term growth potential to outpace tuition inflation at that 5.8%. Let's talk about what future cost of college looks like. This chart shows why 8 in 10 families have to rule out some colleges because of cost. Today, it costs an average of $23,250 to attend 1 year at a public college, and another $53,430 for private college. When you add up 4 years per child, college can quickly become one of a family's largest expenses. And the younger a child is today, the more it will likely cost due to annual price increases. So for example, total private college costs are estimated to be about $98,000 higher for a current newborn than for a 4-year-old. A strong college investment plan starts with a clear understanding of future costs. So I gave a college presentation not too long ago at Mark Twain Middle School in Alexandria. One parent who had an older child enrolled at the University of Virginia made a comment that these numbers were too low. To give you an idea, tuition at UVA for in-state is about $40,000. That is substantially higher than the average number of $23,000 that the slide is using. This point only emphasizes why it is important for you to get a clear understanding of what the true cost of college is, and more importantly, how to save. So let's talk about some other options. So, community college. Some students choose to attend 2 years of community college before transferring to 4-year universities to earn bachelor's degrees. This chart compares total costs for this community college option versus spending all 4 years at an in-state public college. Because tuition and fees average just about $3,860 annually at community colleges, students can save approximately 40% by going there for freshman and sophomore years. Here in Northern Virginia, we have access to NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College. NOVA has guaranteed admission agreements to public and private colleges. I mentioned UVA earlier with a $40,000 tuition. NOVA has an agreement with UVA. As a parent, as a grandparent, think of the opportunity to save thousands of dollars in tuition costs. Now let's get to what I call or describe as the fun slide. So some of you are like myself. My kids are both involved in basketball. If you're like my wife and I, possibly secretly wishing that our children qualify for athletic scholarships, I'm sure there are some on this webinar that can relate to that. But here's the reality. only about 1 to 2% of high school athletes go on to play Division II college sports, and even fewer receive scholarships. For the most popular sports, average scholarships range for around 5,800 to about 8,400 each year, enough to pay only for a small portion of total college costs. For students earning scholarships, a 529 plan offers the flexibility to transfer unused money to another family member or withdraw it without penalty. Athletic scholarships are rarely a substitute for saving and investing. Well, there goes my idea of having Lena follow Caitlin Clark's footsteps. With that, let's talk about some other college planning vehicles. So far, we've talked about the true cost of college. Let's define each one of these different three types of vehicles. Number one, 529, which is a tax advantage vehicle to save for college and trade and vocational courses, participating in the U.S. Department of Education student aid programs. A key feature of a 529 plan is tax deferred growth. Number two, custodial UGMA accounts. These are taxable brokerage accounts that do not have any contribution limits. However, the assets are owned by the child, which can impact financial aid when applying to college. Once the child becomes age of majority, depending on the state, that's typically around 18 to 25, the control of the account is now theirs. For some, this might be a red flag to consider. Lastly, Coverdell education savings accounts. The biggest limitation with Coverdells is the maximum allowable yearly contribution of $2,000 for those who have adjusted gross income under $190,000 for married couples. If you make more than this, the limit is less than the $2,000 maximum. Let's take a look at why 529s are a more flexible vehicle. Compared to custodial accounts, 529 plans typically offer more income, gift, and estate tax benefits. There's greater flexibility and control. Ultimately, there's a less impact on financial aid eligibility. Compared to Coverdell accounts, 529 plans offer no age and income restrictions, as well as higher contribution limits. Here's the thing. Not all college savings plans are the same. The differences among accounts can have major impact on current taxes and future college funds. I like this slide because it describes how most families, most college investors, what they're using to pay for college. So as you can see here, 48% of families use CDs and savings accounts, followed by 401k retirement accounts at 33%. Then finally, we get to a tax advantage 529 educational plan at 31%. In fact, of the 1.9 trillion in total college savings, less than 1/4 is held in 529 plans. What does this mean for you all? Many college investors often choose accounts that don't maximize their growth potential or tax savings. Moving that money into 529 plans can get it working harder for a child's future. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the advantages of a 529. Those include tax-free withdrawals for qualified education expenses, and the option to make large tax-free gifts that are removed from taxable estates. Some of you are grandparents. A 529 is an effective way to gift, and help your grandchild while still maintaining control. Account owners have the flexibility to change beneficiaries and use funds at an accredited school with little or no impact on financial aid eligibility. There are no income or age limits to participate. Low investment minimums make it easy to get started. And high contribution maximums allow families to meet the rising education costs we were talking about earlier. 529 plans offer benefits not found in other types of accounts. In the state of Virginia, contributing to a 529 allows a taxpayer to deduct up to $4,000 per account per beneficiary for their state income taxes. Other states may offer similar opportunities. I encourage you to check with your tax professional. So I was mentioning about qualified education expenses. Let's define that. All 529 plans cover qualified higher education expenses, such as tuition, room and board, computers, books, supplies, and special needs services. In addition, some state plans can be used to pay for apprenticeship programs, K-12 tuition, and even student loans. Investment earnings and withdrawals going toward any of these expenses are free from federal taxes, but state taxes may apply with some plans. This is a good transition, this next slide, to hand things over to Laura. Here, we're talking about a few options. Laura is going to be talking about discussing college preparation and financial aid. On this slide, there's some resources. Some of those resources Laura is going to be mentioning. Laura, I'll stop my share and you can take over from here.
All right. Thank you, Doug. That was very informative and crazy with how much the cost of college is going to be inflated as we move through the next few years here. So like Doug said, I have my own children at home who are young, so this is near and dear to my heart as well. So tonight I will be diving into the college application and planning process, and then I'll also be touching on financial aid as well and the different types of financial aid that your student can earn as they are going through that college application process. Okay, so what goes into the college application? And I do want to actually ask if anyone can put in the chat how old your children or grandchildren are. I'm just curious if you have high schoolers or middle schoolers or even younger. Okay, and so I'll keep an eye out for that. Okay, so what goes into the college application? So the application itself includes the activities list, the personal statement, main essay, supplemental essays, and I'll dive into how you can actually start to think about those things earlier than just junior or senior year. Aside from that, I'm not going to dive into these tonight, but there's standardized test scores, letters of recommendation, transcripts, school report, self-reported academic record, and then additional material depending on what your student is going into and what they're studying. So a lot goes into that application process. And there's, again, a lot that you can do to plan for that early on. So the number one thing I tell my families is to get organized. As your student is starting to go through this process and starting to communicate with colleges or sign up for college tours, starting to follow them on social media, things like that, they want to make sure they have appropriate emails and appropriate accounts. You would think it would go without saying, but sometimes students need a little handholding in this department. So your student should really have an email just for communicating with colleges. That way nothing gets lost or falls through the cracks throughout this process. So Once they have that email set up, as they are starting to go through this process, they will start to think of the different schools that they're interested in, right? And that list can, start off small, or sometimes students have a ton of different schools they might be interested in early on, and then we try to whittle that down. As they're starting to think about schools that do interest them, they should start a tracking sheet. And so a tracking sheet is essentially just a spreadsheet of all the colleges that they're thinking about and various admission statistics, as well as college application components, as well as any other data that they're trying to cross compare when making their decisions on where to apply, and then ultimately where to accept their offer of admission. So some of those things would be the average accepted GPA and test score for that school. And what that tells that student is this a good school for me to apply to? Is this realistic for me? Is it a target? Are my scores right in line with what this school is looking for? Is it a likely school where my statistics are higher than a typical admitted student? Or is this a little bit of a reach for me where my statistics aren't as high as what they typically accept? And it just makes sure they're applying to the right schools. Deadlines, of course, application platform. So, how are you going to apply? And then a big one, right, that we're talking about tonight, cost of attendance. So the cost of attendance, you can find that on the websites for each college under their financial aid page. They will break that cost of attendance down by tuition, room and board, fees. Typically, they're going to also include transportation, books and materials for classes, personal costs, and they'll give you this one overall number, which is that cost of attendance. That cost of attendance price, which is what we call that sticker price, that's not typically what you are going to end up paying after all the financial aid that you receive, whether that's federal aid or merit-based aid, which I'll talk about in just a little bit here. But it does give you a good idea from the get-go which schools are more expensive and which ones are more affordable. I also encourage students to add, if cost is a big part of your process and a big factor for your family, include a column on scholarship money and what types of merit-based scholarship does that school offer, and how much could you potentially earn. Sometimes it's very clear cut on the college's website, and they'll have a certain GPA or a certain test score. That's what you need to get to earn X amount of money. Or sometimes it is a little bit more vague, where they'll indicate kind of a range for the scholarship money you could potentially receive, but it depends on a lot of factors. Other things, their test policy, do they require standardized test scores, and how do they want them submitted? Rec letters, essays, supplemental material. The supplemental material is school specific. So school specific essays and short answer questions, which I will get into in a little bit here. So really the key is to get organized right away so that you're keeping on top of all of the various requirements, which look very different for every single school. Okay, a big piece of the application is the activities list. This is just within the main application that your student's going to be filling out eventually, or maybe they are starting this process now. This, for most students, they'll fill this out in what's called the Common App, which is one application that goes to multiple schools, but it does vary. Sometimes it is a school-specific application, and there are various other applications as well, but the majority of students will use something called Common App. And the activities list goes to all of the schools they are applying to under Common App. My advice for underclassmen, so if you have a younger student, quality over quantity is key when they are getting involved in activities throughout high school. So you're only going to report those high school activities, anything you're doing from the summer after 8th grade through the time that you are applying. A lot of students had this misconception that they need to be involved in 20 different things, or they need to be president of multiple clubs. And, that is definitely not the case. It is all about how deep you are diving into what you are doing. So I tell students, find something you're passionate about early if you can. It's okay. You might have to take some time to explore that. But once you find something you enjoy, deep dive into that. Really, it's more than just being a member of something, but take control of the fundraising or the social media account. Maybe you do eventually have a leadership title within that organization, whatever it is, but they want to see that you're committed over time. So I can't speak enough about that. The other piece here is if your student does know what they might want to do in the future, and again, this could always change. It does for most students, but if they have a general idea of what pathway they want to go down, maybe they want to go to med school, maybe they want to be a lawyer, maybe they want to be an environmental scientist, whatever it is, if they can align their involvement and their activities with that field, that is a wonderful thing to showcase on that application and really creates a theme for that student, which is a positive thing in the admissions process. The other thing I want to add here is activities are not just organized activities. They can be clubs within the school, athletics within the school, but it can also be organizations outside of the school. It can be hobbies, family responsibilities. They just want to know how a student is spending their time. And this is something to really dive into right away once you get into high school. I won't hit too much on this here, but as they are adding their activities list to their Common App. So this is really for my older students, my juniors, who are getting ready for this process, or maybe starting their Common App already, which they can do that. If they start that process now, all of that information under the Common App tab will roll over into their application next year. But the activities list is much more than data entry. It should take time, just like an essay takes time. You want to brain dump everything you've done. You want to pull out the most important things, who you impacted, how you impacted them, quantify what you're doing. That's going to be important through this process. Ordering activities appropriately, making sure their most selective or highest involvement are near the top, and then their lowest involved activities would be near the bottom, and they can report up to 10. And then I mentioned before, but thinking outside the box, it's not all about organized activities. It's about anything that they're doing. Maybe you might hear the term passion project or independent project. Maybe they started a blog. Maybe they're tutoring their neighbor. Something like that, those are things that they want to include, and that helps them stand out. And then I mentioned quantifying what they're doing. And so as your student is moving through high school, if they are an underclassman, it really helps to keep track of all their activities from day one of high school, to write down everything that they're doing as they add new activities. And then within each activity, anytime they have an event, anytime they contribute to that organization, what did they do? Who did they help? And they really want to quantify what they're doing. So how much did they fundraise? How many people came? How many students did you tutor? You get the idea there. And then for the essay, so this is a huge piece of the application process that gives your student an opportunity to tell the college admissions reader something new about them that they cannot get from any other aspect of that application. And the main essay is the essay that gets sent out to all colleges. Most will read it. Not all colleges do require that essay, but most do. And it can be about anything, as long as it highlights your students' values and things that shape them. Some of the best essays are written about the most simple things. And I'll just give you an example of one that stood out actually to our UVA rep recently. One of the UVA reps mentioned a student, I think from this graduating class, that wrote about how they're going to miss their rides to school every day with their younger sister, because that is how they start every single day, having a conversation with their sister in the car, and how that's impacted them. And so it's those simple everyday life events that usually make the biggest impact. So what I would recommend for my underclassmen here is just keeping journal entries throughout high school. Anytime something unique happens, anytime something happens that really changes you, write it down. Definitely write it down, because you can come back to that journal later to see if it is something you want to elaborate on and share with the admissions rep down the line. Just for informational purposes, the main essay on the Common App is between 250 and 650 words. There are prompts that students can choose from, but one of those is to write about a topic of your choice. So again, they can write anything. And my biggest advice for students here is when you are choosing your topic and you have written about that topic, you need to ask yourself two questions. Did this showcase something about me that the college cannot get from any other piece of my application? And then also, could this essay only have been written by me? If, someone picks it up off the street, can they say this is Sally Smith's essay, because nobody else has this story? And if they can, then that is a good essay. If they can't, then they might want to revisit what they've written. And then every college, not every, but a lot of colleges have supplemental essays or short answer questions as well. Those vary between colleges. A lot of common questions will be, why do you choose this major? Why do you choose our school? Share an aspect of your identity or your background. But sometimes they are more fun, I'll say. They could be anything. Some of the ones that are out there right now, if you could start a class about anything, what would it be? What's something that you can talk about all day long and never get tired of? If you had a superpower, what would that be? So you can see there are some more fun ones out there too. And these are really important to showcase just a different side of your student. And just some reminders that the essay tends to be the most overwhelming piece of this process, but that it is okay to just start with a brain dump and that it does strengthen over time. You want your student to be real with themselves and be honest. Don't try to be someone that you're not. A lot of times I read essays and it's not in that student's voice. It doesn't sound anything like anything they would have written. And so it's important for them to remember that, they're teenagers and the rep wants to hear their voice, not somebody else's. And the more concise, the better, because they're reading hundreds of these. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about that financial aid piece. A lot of this piece will come after or at the end of when your student is submitting their application, but it just depends on the deadlines. Sometimes it kind of coexists together and you'll be doing financial aid applications and the applications for the actual colleges, but a lot of times students are wrapping up their college applications and then going into this financial aid process in early October. So there's two types of financial aid that students can get. There's need-based aid and there's merit-based aid. Need-based aid is based on your family's financial situation, and merit-based aid is based on your student's academic performance, or sometimes some other aspects of who they are, just how they are as a leader or any personal characteristics that they have. So the federal financial aid piece, the need-based aid, the way that you get that is through filling out the FAFSA. And I know this was something that Doug had listed on his presentation as well. It's the free application for federal student aid. If you ever are getting charged for filling this out, then know that is a scam website. And it is at studentaid.gov. That is the FAFSA. It is free to fill out. Typically, it is available on October 1st. So we are crossing our fingers that that will be the case for the class of 2025 and beyond. This year, there was a lot of issues with launching it because it went through a ton of changes. It went from 100 and some questions down to a max of 40 some, depending on your answers to the questions. But there was a lot of issues launching that new FAFSA. So lots of delays. They got it out the last day of the year, which legally they had to do. So there was still a lot of technical difficulties. And unfortunately, the colleges did not even receive the students' information until March, which caused a lot of delays in those financial aid packages, which is what Doug was mentioning early and caused a lot of stress for our students. So hopefully we'll see a much better process next year. But what colleges do is once you fill out that FAFSA, you'll get something called a student aid index. That is based on a calculation, and essentially what that is what the federal government believes your family can afford for college. The colleges take their cost of attending and they subtract that student aid index, and then they give you aid based on that discrepancy. So the four types of aid that you might see on the FAFSA are scholarships, grant money, which those do not need to be paid back. And then you might see work study and loans as well. Work study is an opportunity to work on campus, and then you get paid for your work, and hopefully you are putting that towards your tuition or fees. And then loans, of course, there are a large variety of loans. So you get to pick and choose what you might want to accept or what you don't want to accept. Some colleges will also have something called a CSS profile. This is something through College Board, who also does the SATs and the AP testing. But a lot of colleges will utilize this, or I should say a handful of colleges will utilize this. It is a much lengthier application. It's about 200 questions, but it gets at a lot more financial questions to really get to know the ins and outs of your family's financial situation. And it does allow the individual colleges to provide additional need-based aid. So that's just something to be on the lookout for. And there actually is a cost with the CSS profile. And then on the flip side of need-based aid, there's merit-based aid. So this, again, is based on your student's performance, their academic profile. Right now, with a lot of colleges going test optional, although a lot are now moving back to test required, so that is something to pay attention to if you do have a current junior. But most colleges right now are basing these scholarships on just grades, not test scores, but some colleges are still looking at that. So you need to do your research to see what they require for their merit-based aid. Most students are going to be considered just by applying to the school. So just by applying to the school or by a certain deadline. Sometimes you'll see something called a priority deadline. That typically means aid deadline, but not always, or merit-based aid deadline. So just depends on the college. But just by applying, they'll be looked at and it will be determined if the college can give them any money or not. And then your student would receive a letter indicating this is the scholarship money that we can provide you for attending our school. Some colleges do have separate applications for freshmen to complete, for rising freshmen to complete, to be considered for that merit-based aid. So again, it's just important to look at what your college's policies are. And then this is really important to know. A lot of students in our area are applying to some very selective colleges. They are not going to have a lot of aid to give because they don't need to. They are going to get students no matter what. So I want students to broaden their thinking and think about schools that maybe they never thought about before. The less selective the school, the more, and the higher the academic profile, the more money that your student will receive. And so that can substantially bring that cost of college down. And the more selective school does not mean better. That's important to know. Okay. The other piece of this is scholarship money outside of institutional scholarship money. So many counties will offer county-specific scholarships. So I'm not sure where our families are joining from, whether it's Loudoun, Fairfax, Prince William, wherever, but check with your student's counselor or college advisor, whatever they have at their school, about county scholarships, because there will be these scholarships that they can apply to. Typically during their senior year, a lot of these will come out winter, early spring of senior year, but some are available earlier and some are available for underclassmen as well, but the majority will be for seniors. And this is where I want students to really start looking for scholarships before they even dive into those scholarship search engines, because these are less less competitive. You know, they're only applying against other students from their counties or surrounding counties. And so it's much more likely that they would be awarded these scholarships. So definitely worth the time. And then there are scholarship search engines as well. FastWeb is a good one, Big Future, Sally Mae. There's a lot out there, but these are 3 reputable ones where your student can create a profile. And then depending on their profile, the scholarship search engines will match them with various scholarships that they could potentially apply to. And it's just very important as they're going through this process that they are paying attention to deadlines and eligibility requirements to make sure that they are actually, in fact, eligible. Okay, and those are, of course, are going to be more competitive because they are typically state scholarships or national scholarships, and you know, there's hundreds or thousands of students applying to those. But they are out there, and the time is worth it. Sometimes I think students see a scholarship that might not be worth a ton of money. Maybe it's a $250 scholarship, but if they spend an hour on that application and they get $250, that's more, you know, than they'll make in an hour. So it's definitely worth it. I can't stress that enough. Okay, so this is just a QR code if you're interested in learning more about how Loudoun College Counseling can help your family or your student through the application process. Feel free to scan that and fill that Google form out, and I would be happy to connect with you just with our services and what we can provide. But we're really here to help the process go smoother and break the application process down for students, as well as help younger students plan for this process so that it's easier when the time comes. And then you're also more than welcome to connect with us on social media, contact us there at the bottom, just info@keepcollegesimple.com. And we are happy to help. We love what we do. So thank you guys. And I'm going to stop sharing here. And if there are any questions, we would love to answer them.
Feel free to type it into the chat and we'll go ahead and address any of those questions. Laura, actually, I have a question from you that came from a client who was not able to attend this evening. So she is a graduate of Virginia Tech.
Okay.
And she was told that Northern Virginia, being a resident of Fairfax County, Loudoun County, anywhere in Northern Virginia, that some schools may limit the number of students that come from a certain region. Have you heard of that? Is that true?
So that's false. That is actually false. So there are no quotas for certain areas or for certain high schools. That's a big one that we get a lot. If a certain high school has a limit, but no quotas at all. The only quota that schools do have to meet, and this would be just as an example for the state of Virginia, they have to at least have 70% of their incoming freshman class as in-state applicants. And then that other 30, or they can go beyond that 70, but it has to be at least 70. But that other 30% can be out of state or international.
Very good. So now we got a little bit more time for questions. I do want to address one common question that I get when I'm presenting about colleges in 529. So, and it's a legitimate concern. So here's a scenario. You're a parent, grandparent, and you have a young child, grandchild, but you're not really sure if they're going to go to college, right? They're 2, they're 3, they're 4. A lot can happen. So one of the objections that we usually get is, okay, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future. I don't have a crystal ball. What happens to all this money when it comes to being invested into a 529? Well, there's a couple of solutions for that. I'll just go over a couple of them. That way it gives you all an idea. So one solution is changing the beneficiary to another child or a future grandchild. Another option is to use 529 money for trade or vocational school. So we're located in Tysons. A few months ago, I was curious. So I went to the Department of Education, trade, vocational school area. And I did a quick search in Tysons about what trade vocation opportunities are there in the area. And there's a lot. So it ranged from CVS, Walgreens as a pharmacy tech. Then they were training under a master plumber, master electrician. So those are a lot of options out there for parents, for kids who don't really know what they want to do. Another option is for a parent to ultimately just fund 1 or 2 years of college. There's no need to really fund 4 years if you're not really, if you don't really know what's going to happen. Of course, there's drawbacks to that. So ultimately, for any non-qualified 529 distribution, meaning distributions not used for education, the earnings portion on that distribution is subject to a 10% withdrawal penalty and income taxes. So depending on the state, there might even be an additional income tax penalty that the state charges. But remember, any contributions, since they were made after tax, will never be penalized or taxed because they were made with contributions after tax dollars. So to truly understand or know what options you have, it's good to leverage myself, our team at EBW, and your tax professional. But I just wanted to chime that in because I know for many families out there, no one really knows what the future holds for their child. So it's always good to know what your options are. Laura, from your experience, what are, the last question, and I'll leave it to you to end our webinar, is what is the most creative, and this is something fun, creative situation essay that you have seen written that has gotten a student into the top school of their choice? We'll end it on a fun note after this.
Yes. Okay. Most creative. I've seen a lot of good ones. So an essay that got a student actually into Georgetown. Now, one factor, right? It's a small piece of a big pie. But the question was essentially something that you experienced that like changed your life, changed your trajectory. And they wrote about learning to tie their shoe. And it's, again, goes back to such a simple thing, but makes such a big impact. And when you think about that, it's so true, right? That's such a big feat when you're younger, and it can give you such confidence. So that was a fun one. And again, very simple, but creative.
I like it. That is creative. As somebody who's still struggling to teach Leo, my youngest, how to tie his own shoes.
He might be writing about it in the future.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Laura, I really appreciate you taking the time to add value to our existing client base, to provide your knowledge. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for joining.
And everyone, you have our contact information. There's our email address. If there's any questions, you all know how to reach out. In the meantime, you all have a good evening. Take care.